The contract of pretend. The city lights shimmered outside the glass walls of Emma Rose's small apartment, painting silver streaks across her desk, where her half-finished marketing proposal waited in silence. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat, steady, impatient, and mocking. She tried to focus on the numbers, the graphs, the pitch slides that would decide the fate of her next project. But her thoughts kept dragging her back to the laughter she had heard at work earlier that day. Ryan Mitchell, the man who had once held her hand under starlit skies, who had whispered promises of forever, now mocked her in the same break room where they used to share coffee. His voice still echoed in her ears, smooth, confident, cruel. She waited for me every morning with a latte and that silly smile, he had told their colleagues, laughing as though her heartbreak were a punchline. Poor Emma. She thought I'd marry her. I needed someone mature, someone who wouldn't cry when business got real. The words burned deeper than she cared to admit. 6 months had passed since their breakup, yet he continued to humiliate her at every opportunity, spreading stories, twisting truth into entertainment, and dragging her name through whispers that reached every corner of Sterling Communications. Emma had always dreamed of working there. The company was known for its global campaigns, elegant branding, and culture of innovation. But ever since Ryan's promotion to senior account manager, a role she had been shortlisted for, the atmosphere had changed. Her efforts went unnoticed, her reports mysteriously delayed, and her ideas quietly dismissed in meetings. It wasn't incompetence. It was retaliation dressed as professionalism. And now the annual company gala loomed ahead. A night where every employee was expected to attend with a date, a partner, or someone impressive enough to make an impression. Last year, she had walked in with Ryan. This year, the thought of showing up alone, standing in the same ballroom as him and his new girlfriend, filled her with dread. That evening, after yet another sleepless hour of scrolling through her inbox, Emma found herself doing something she never thought she would. On a dimly lit laptop screen, she searched for professional companions for social events. At first, the listings were absurd. Men with sculpted smiles, suspiciously perfect profiles, and words like fun-loving or romantic evenings guaranteed. She rolled her eyes and almost closed the browser, telling herself she'd rather face humiliation than resort to this. But then one name stopped her. Gabriel Stone. No glamour poses, no cheesy slogans, just one photograph. Black suit, white shirt, an air of confidence that wasn't loud but commanding. His eyes, green, sharp, intelligent, looked directly into the camera, not with arrogance but quiet certainty. The profile read, discreet professional companion for formal and business events. Experienced in corporate environments. Rate $800 per evening. It was expensive, almost reckless, but there was something about him that stood out from the crowd. His words were direct. His appearance immaculate. He didn't look like a man trying to sell charm. He looked like someone who already had it. Against every sensible thought, Emma clicked contact. Her message was cautious, polite, and painfully honest. Hello, Mr. Stone. I need an escort for a company gala this Saturday evening. The event will be at the Grand Hyatt Hotel, from 7 p.m. until midnight. I'd like to discuss the details if you're available. She hesitated before sending it, but eventually pressed send and stared at the screen, her heart hammering. His reply arrived within 30 minutes. Hello, Emma, thank you for reaching out. I'm available on Saturday. Before we finalize, I prefer to meet in person to discuss details and ensure compatibility for the event. Would tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the Meridian Cafe on 5th Street work for you? It wasn't what she expected. Most profiles she had browsed earlier demanded payment up front, or barely responded at all. Gabriel wanted to meet first, like this was an actual business transaction rather than a favor she was buying out of desperation. Her nerves spiked, but curiosity outweighed fear. She agreed. The next evening, Emma arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early. The place smelled of roasted coffee and quiet confidence. Mahogany tables, jazz in the background, and soft amber lighting that made everything feel like a movie scene. She wore a simple navy dress and carried a folder with details about the event. Guest list, dress code, her notes about the company structure, even a fake backstory she had scribbled to make their relationship believable. At exactly 6, the door opened, and the air seemed to change. He walked in. Gabriel Stone looked nothing like a man who needed to rent out his time. He was tall, athletic, dressed in a tailored gray suit that fit with effortless precision. His hair was dark and neatly styled, his posture so refined it made everyone else in the cafe fade into the background. When his eyes met hers, there was no awkwardness, only calm assurance, as if he already knew he'd be in control of whatever came next. "Emma," he said, voice smooth as silk yet grounded in authority. She nodded, extending a hand. His grip was firm, steady, professional. But his eyes, they seemed to read more than she said. They sat. The conversation began formally. Details, expectations, her reason for hiring him. But somewhere between the lines, Emma realized she was revealing too much. She told him about her ex, Ryan's arrogance, the way he turned her career into a battleground. Gabriel listened, not interrupting, not judging. When he did speak, it was to clarify or to reassure, as if he wasn't just memorizing her words but understanding the person behind them. "So," he said finally, "you need someone convincing enough to silence him." "Yes," she admitted. "He feeds on weakness. If he sees me alone, it'll never end." Gabriel's lips curved slightly. "Then let's make sure he sees something that terrifies him." The way he said it sent a chill down her spine. Not threatening, but powerful, protective, almost dangerous in its calmness. They spent the next hour crafting their cover story. They met at a coffee shop 3 months ago. He was a consultant who traveled frequently, which explained why her coworkers hadn't met him yet. He was patient, respectful, supportive. Everything Ryan wasn't, but subtle cracks began to show in his mask. When she mentioned the company's CEO, Jonathan Sterling, Gabriel's reaction shifted ever so slightly. His eyes sharpened, his expression calculating. He asked about the firm's client portfolio, recent mergers, and market value. Questions too informed for a man playing a pretend role. When the check arrived, he paid without hesitation, using a black American Express card. Emma caught a glimpse of the embossed name, Gabriel Stone. The kind of card reserved for the elite, the kind who didn't need to rent themselves out for a living. As they stepped outside into the evening breeze, Emma hesitated. "Can I ask something personal?" He looked at her. "Of course, why do you do this, escort work?" He smiled faintly. "Let's just say I'm helping someone out. A favor for a friend who runs the agency." "For what I'm paying you? It doesn't sound like a favor," she said softly. "Consider it a discounted rate for a worthy cause." His words lingered long after they parted. As her taxi pulled away, she glanced through the window. He was still standing on the sidewalk, looking at his phone, the city lights painting silver across his suit. Everything about him screamed power, control, and secrets. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She replayed every word, every look. There was something about Gabriel that felt both comforting and dangerous. The way he moved, the way he spoke, it wasn't just charm. It was presence, the kind that couldn't be learned. She had a creeping suspicion that the man she'd hired for one night was living a life far beyond anything she imagined. The next few days blurred by in a mix of nerves and anticipation. When Saturday evening finally arrived, Emma stood before her mirror, adjusting the neckline of her deep burgundy gown. She wasn't the same timid woman from 6 months ago. She looked radiant, calm, elegant, unstoppable. At 6:30 sharp, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she froze. Gabriel stood there in a black tuxedo so perfectly tailored it might have been crafted for royalty. His hair was brushed back, his eyes glinting under the soft hallway light. He carried a single white rose. "For you," he said simply, his voice low and warm. "You look beautiful." Emma felt her breath hitch. "You look like you stepped out of a magazine." He smiled faintly, offering his arm. "Shall we go make your ex regret his decisions?" The ride to the Grand Hyatt was almost surreal. Outside, the city glowed in 1,000 shades of gold. Inside, silence carried a quiet electricity. Gabriel asked about her dreams, her family, her goals, and she found herself opening up more than she ever had with anyone. He listened, really listened, without judgment or agenda. As their car pulled up to the grand entrance, Emma's heart thudded. The hotel glittered like a palace, and the ballroom inside shimmered with chandeliers and music. But when Gabriel placed a hand lightly at her back and said, "Remember, you're not pretending to be confident. You are," she believed him. They entered together and heads turned instantly. Conversations paused, eyes followed them. Gabriel's presence filled the room effortlessly. Every movement he made spoke of authority and ease. Emma caught Ryan's expression across the hall. It was a flicker of disbelief, then irritation. "Let the games begin," Gabriel murmured, offering her a smile that made her heart race. And as they walked deeper into the glittering crowd, Emma had no idea that the man beside her, the stranger she had hired to save her pride, wasn't just pretending to belong in that world. He was that world. The night would reveal everything, the lies, the truth, and the reason a millionaire in disguise had chosen to step into the life of an ordinary woman just to help her win one impossible evening. The Mask of Wealth. The ballroom shimmered with gold and crystal, chandeliers scattering light across hundreds of guests dressed in their finest. The music flowed like silk through the air, soft and sophisticated, and laughter bubbled around the corners of the room as conversations overlapped in elegant chaos. For a moment, as Emma stepped through the entrance beside Gabriel, her fears dissolved into the glitter of it all. She wasn't the shy, overlooked employee who had spent months swallowing humiliation. She was a woman stepping into her power, and the man beside her, tall, composed, devastatingly confident, made it feel like she belonged there. Heads turned as they walked. It wasn't just because Gabriel looked like he had been born into wealth. It was because of the aura he carried. Every gesture, every movement spoke of assurance. His presence had weight. People noticed him, respected him without knowing why. Emma could feel the eyes on them, 100 silent assessments passing like currents. But when Gabriel's hand brushed hers lightly in reassurance, the anxiety in her chest softened. "Remember," he murmured near her ear, "tonight you owe no one an apology. You belong wherever you choose to stand." Those words settled in her like warmth after years of cold. They moved through the crowd with effortless grace. Emma introduced him to her colleagues, to members of management, to the people who had once pitied her or whispered behind her back. Every time she said, "My boyfriend Gabriel," she felt a quiet triumph bloom. Gabriel, for his part, was flawless. He engaged in conversations with a measured charm that seemed instinctive, discussing marketing trends with executives, complimenting the creative team on their latest campaign, even recalling details about Sterling Communications partnerships that Emma hadn't mentioned. He wasn't just blending in, he was leading the rhythm of the room. Then she felt it, the sharp sting of Ryan's gaze from across the hall. He stood at the bar, one hand tucked into his pocket, the other holding a glass of whiskey. His expression was unreadable at first, but the tightening of his jaw betrayed him. He wasn't used to being surprised, especially not by Emma. When his eyes met Gabriel's, something passed between them, a silent clash of egos, brief but unmistakable. Gabriel didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge it beyond the faintest smile before turning back to Emma. "He's looking," Gabriel whispered softly. "Good. Let him." Dinner was served under soft light, and the evening unfolded with polished perfection. Yet beneath the glow of champagne and conversation, Emma couldn't ignore the growing sense that Gabriel's confidence came from something far deeper than performance. When the company's CEO, Jonathan Sterling, approached their table, she felt Gabriel's demeanor shift. He stood to shake the man's hand, his tone steady and respectful, but his gaze carried something sharp, assessing. Jonathan looked intrigued. "Gabriel Stone," he repeated slowly. "That name sounds familiar. Are you in investments?" "Something like that," Gabriel replied smoothly, a faint smile at the corner of his lips. "I help companies find stability in uncertain markets." "A consultant, then?" Jonathan asked, still studying him. "In a sense, I prefer to think of it as strategy," Jonathan chuckled. "We could use more of that. Our biggest client just gave us quite the headache, I heard," Gabriel said casually, lifting his glass. "The Morrison account?" Jonathan's amusement faded. "You've done your homework." Emma blinked in surprise. She hadn't told him that. Gabriel met Jonathan's eyes evenly. "I like to understand the circles I'll be walking into." It was a harmless enough statement, but Emma noticed Jonathan's expression tighten for just a second before he excused himself politely and moved on. When she turned back to Gabriel, his gaze was distant, as if he were watching invisible threads connect and move around the room. Later, during dessert, Ryan approached. The moment Emma had dreaded all evening arrived in a blur of forced smiles and false charm. He leaned against their table, pretending not to notice Gabriel. "Emma, you look incredible," he said. voice dripping with nostalgia. I was just telling a few people how proud I am to see how far you've come. Care to dance for old time's sake? Gabriel's hand resting casually on the table tensed slightly. His expression didn't change, but Emma felt his presence grow more protective, more deliberate. I'm here with my boyfriend, Ryan, she said evenly, her tone polite but final. Ryan laughed, ignoring Gabriel as though he didn't exist. Sure, of course, the new boyfriend. Gabriel, was it? What do you do again? Gabriel rose from his chair slowly, every movement measured. I help people see the value of what they've been too foolish to recognize, he said, his calm voice carrying an undertone that made Ryan blink. Emma, for instance, is remarkable. Anyone who underestimated her made a grave mistake. The air around the table thickened. Ryan's forced grin faltered. You sound like you know me, he said, attempting to regain control. I know the type, Gabriel replied smoothly. Men who mistake cruelty for confidence. But I also know that life has a way of humbling arrogance. Don't you think? Ryan's knuckles whitened around his glass, but before he could answer, an interruption swept across the ballroom. Jonathan Sterling and several executives huddled near the main stage, their faces tight with concern. The music softened and whispers spread quickly. Something was wrong. Emma glanced around. What's happening? Gabriel's expression shifted instantly from relaxed to razor-sharp focus. Wait here, he murmured, standing. Within moments, he was moving toward the cluster of executives like a man who belonged there. Emma followed at a distance, curiosity overcoming hesitation. She watched as he approached Jonathan Sterling directly, cutting through the crowd with silent authority. Mr. Sterling, Gabriel said quietly but firmly. I couldn't help overhearing. Is this about Morrison Group threatening to withdraw their contract? Jonathan looked up surprised. It's an internal issue, he said cautiously. May I? Gabriel extended his hand toward the documents one of the executives was holding. There was hesitation, but something about his tone left little room for argument. He scanned the papers quickly, his brow furrowing slightly. You're calculating the penalty using Section 7.4 of the contract? Yes, Sterling's financial director replied. They're citing breach of performance targets. Gabriel shook his head. That clause only applies if underperformance wasn't due to market volatility. Section 9.1, force majeure, clearly protects you. The downturn affected all media analytics this quarter. They can't legally terminate without a 30-day renegotiation window. You could sue for damages instead of paying penalties. The executive stared at him as if he'd just spoken magic. Jonathan blinked. How do you know this? Gabriel smiled faintly. Because I helped draft a similar contract. Once. Emma watched in astonishment as the CEO ordered his team to verify the clause. Within minutes, relief rippled through the group. He's right, the financial director said breathlessly. We can hold Morrison to the renegotiation. Jonathan turned back to Gabriel, amazement in his eyes. You just saved us millions. Gabriel inclined his head modestly. Consider it my contribution to the evening. As the executives dispersed, Jonathan placed a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. I have a feeling this won't be our last conversation, Mr. Stone. When Gabriel returned to Emma, she was still processing what she had witnessed. What just happened? She whispered. Just business, he said lightly, though there was an unreadable glint in his eyes. Sometimes knowing where to look makes all the difference. For the rest of the night, people looked at Gabriel differently. They sought him out, wanting to shake his hand, to talk, to be seen speaking with him. Even the company's CFO invited him to a private luncheon. It was as if the entire hierarchy of Sterling Communications had shifted subtly around this one mysterious man who wasn't supposed to exist in their world. When the gala finally ended and they stepped outside into the quiet night air, Emma felt dizzy with everything that had happened. Gabriel walked beside her, silent, his gaze lost in thought. Finally, she said softly, You knew exactly what to say in there. That wasn't luck. Who are you, really? He stopped by the car, turning to face her fully. For a long moment, he said nothing. The city's lights reflected in his eyes, and for the first time, she saw a hint of conflict beneath the calm. Let's just say I've spent too long pretending to be someone I'm not, he said finally. But tonight, helping you, helping them, felt like the first honest thing I've done in years. Emma's heart beat faster. You're not just an escort, are you? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not exactly. But for now, let's keep it that way. As their car drove away from the glittering hotel, the illusion of the night lingered between them, beautiful, fragile, and full of secrets. Emma didn't know it yet, but the man she had hired for one evening was about to change everything: her career, her future, and the way she understood trust itself. Because Gabriel Stone's secret wasn't just about wealth. It was about redemption, identity, and a past that had been carefully erased from the world's view. And as dawn crept over the city, he looked out the window silent, his reflection fractured by the glass. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the polished surface of his disguise, the man who had once built an empire now wondered if one ordinary woman might be the key to finding himself again. The truth beneath the suit. The morning after the gala, the city awoke slowly under a pale gold sky, and with it came the aftershocks of the night before. For Emma, it was supposed to be the end of an elaborate pretense, an evening of appearances and carefully constructed illusions that would allow her to reclaim her dignity from Ryan's cruelty. Yet as she stirred her coffee and stared blankly at her reflection in the cafe window, she knew something had shifted inside her. The image of Gabriel standing in that ballroom, confident, commanding, saving an entire company from collapse with a few precise words, wouldn't leave her mind. No ordinary escort could have done that. No hired actor could have read through a complex legal clause, challenge executives, and win the respect of Jonathan Sterling in a matter of minutes. Whoever Gabriel Stone was, he wasn't the man he claimed to be. Her phone buzzed. A message. Gabriel. Did you sleep at all, or are you still replaying last night's chaos like I am? A small smile tugged at her lips. His tone was casual, but the way he phrased it, simple, direct, teasingly observant, felt almost personal. You mean the part where you saved an entire company like it was an afternoon puzzle? She typed back. Yes, that part kept me awake. His reply came almost instantly. Then I'll have to buy you coffee for the lost sleep. Meridian Cafe, noon? My treat this time. When she walked into the cafe later that day, the same one where they had first met, she found him already seated by the window, a black coffee in one hand and the morning paper in the other. He looked as effortlessly elegant as ever. Dark blue shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal the edge of a sleek watch. But it was his calm composure that caught her most. The world could crumble, and Gabriel Stone would probably still find a way to stand centered in it. Good morning, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Morning, Emma. He greeted with that quiet voice that always seemed to carry more weight than its volume allowed. I take it you survived the Sterling circus? Barely, she admitted. You, on the other hand, seemed born for it. Tell me, is this what you usually do? Show up at corporate events and save million-dollar contracts between cocktails? He smiled faintly. Only when I'm in the mood to impress. Impress? She scoffed. You practically redefined the word. The CEO wants to meet you again. He told half the board about you. Gabriel, who are you? For the briefest second, his confident facade faltered. He leaned back, his gaze lowering to his untouched coffee. I told you, he said softly. I'm a consultant. No, she said, her tone firmer. You're something else. The way you spoke, the way people reacted to you, it wasn't just experience. It was authority. You moved like someone used to being obeyed, not hired. His eyes lifted to hers, and for a long moment silence stretched between them. You're observant, he said finally. Most people see what they want to see. I'm not most people. He studied her face for a long time as though weighing something within himself. Then he sighed. Let's just say that once I ran a company not unlike Sterling. Bigger, actually. I built it from nothing. I worked through nights, made impossible deals, survived betrayals. I thought success meant control. But when you lose sight of who you are, the empire you build becomes your cage. Emma leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. What happened? His eyes darkened. Someone I trusted took everything. A partner, a friend. He stole the company, the name, the people I considered family. I walked away rather than fight dirty. The world thought Gabriel Stone disappeared. Maybe I did in a way. I stopped chasing power and I started doing something simple, helping people even if it's one stranger at a time. The confession hung in the air between them, quiet yet heavy. Emma felt the truth in his words. It wasn't self-pity, it was grief turned into restraint. And that's why you were on that agency site, she said slowly. Helping a friend, he nodded. She runs the agency. I fill in occasionally when she needs someone reliable, someone discreet. People hire masks, Emma. But sometimes behind those masks, real moments happen. For the first time, she saw the man behind the mystery. Not the immaculate suit, not the measured tone, but the weariness of someone who had lived too much and lost more than he'd admit. You know, she said quietly, you could start over. You're obviously brilliant. You still have that spark. Why not rebuild? His smile was small, sad. Because rebuilding means going back to a world that already buried me once. I'd rather live invisible than live as someone else's ghost. They talked for hours. The coffee turned cold between them, and sunlight shifted slowly across the table as the afternoon wore on. For the first time in months, Emma felt a sense of calm. Not the forced composure she wore at work, but genuine peace. She told him about her struggles at Sterling Communications, about how Ryan had poisoned her reputation, how she feared she'd never get promoted because of the rumors. Gabriel listened with the same quiet attentiveness he always had. But now there was something else in his expression, a kind of protective resolve. When they finally left the cafe, the sky had begun to fade into amber. Emma, he said as they reached her car, if Ryan's been sabotaging you at work, stop trying to survive quietly. Fight, but fight smart. How? She asked. He's connected. Every complaint I make disappears. Then let your results speak. Beat him with excellence. When they see you shine despite his efforts, he'll collapse under his own arrogance. She looked up at him, her voice softer now. You make it sound easy. It's not. But I've learned something, he said, gazing toward the horizon. The strongest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's living so well that they fade into irrelevance. Those words echoed in her mind for days afterward. At work, everything felt subtly different. People who once dismissed her now greeted her with polite curiosity, whispering about the mysterious man who had charmed the CEO and left an impression on the company's top brass. Ryan, however, grew colder, his smiles tighter. He could sense the shift in balance, the invisible power that came from confidence. 2 days later, the company circulated a memo. A special advisory board position had been created to review Sterling's investment strategies. An independent consultant had been invited to assist temporarily. When Emma read the name, her breath caught. Gabriel Stone. She almost dropped her phone. When she confronted him later that evening outside Sterling's glass tower, he was leaning casually against a black sedan watching the city lights. You joined the board? She demanded. He smiled slightly. Temporarily. Jonathan Sterling insisted after that little legal rescue. It would have been rude to refuse. You could have warned me, she said, half exasperated, half amused. I didn't think you'd want special treatment. I don't, she said quickly. But now everyone will assume I only got recognition because of you. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. Then prove them wrong. Show them what you're capable of and let them choke on their assumptions. The way he said it made her pulse quicken, not because of the words, but because of the unshakable belief behind them. He didn't see her as a fragile woman needing protection. He saw her as a force waiting to be unleashed. The following weeks became a whirlwind. Gabriel's presence in the company changed everything. He introduced new systems, refined presentations, and dismantled inefficiencies that had gone unnoticed for years. Under his subtle mentorship, Emma's performance skyrocketed. She took initiative on campaigns, won clients with polished confidence, and spoke in meetings with a strength that silenced her critics. Ryan's influence began to crumble piece by piece, his arrogance turning brittle as he watched her rise beyond his reach. But beneath the professional triumphs, something deeper was building, an unspoken tension that neither of them could fully ignore. They met often after work, sometimes under the pretext of discussing projects, other times because silence felt lonelier without each other. There were no grand declarations, no impulsive moments, just quiet glances, lingering words, and the soft hum of possibility. One evening, after a particularly long board session, Emma found herself standing beside Gabriel in the empty elevator. The city glittered far below through the glass walls. You know, she said, breaking the silence, you could have told me you were wealthy from the start. He looked at her, his voice calm. Would it have changed how you saw me? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe. I might have thought you were just another rich man playing games. Then I'm glad I didn't, he said quietly. Because for once I wanted someone to see me. Not the money, not the name, just the man trying to be better than he was. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into the cool night air. Emma turned to face him. For someone who hides so much, you're terrible at pretending. He smiled, his expression unreadable. Maybe that's because you make me forget I'm supposed to. For the first time in years, Emma's laughter came easily. The woman who had once been broken by humiliation now stood stronger, braver and freer, and the man beside her, who had buried his identity beneath layers of silence, was slowly remembering what it meant to feel alive again. But the peace between them was fragile, and destiny had a way of testing those who thought they'd escaped its reach. Because somewhere in the glittering maze of Sterling Communications, a shadow from Gabriel's past was stirring, a name whispered in boardrooms, a face he had once trusted, and a betrayal that had rewritten his life. And soon, both Emma and Gabriel would discover that the truth beneath the suit was far more dangerous and far more redemptive than either of them had ever imagined. The past returns. The weeks that followed carried an almost dreamlike rhythm, a golden interlude where ambition, admiration, and quiet affection wove themselves into the fabric of everyday life. Sterling Communications began to change from the inside out. Fresh ideas flowed, new partnerships formed, and the office, once stifled by ego and competition, now buzzed with an unfamiliar sense of purpose. At the heart of this quiet transformation stood Emma and Gabriel, their connection deepening in unspoken ways, their professional synergy impossible to ignore. Yet beneath the surface, threads of the past were tightening, unseen but inevitable, pulling Gabriel toward the reckoning he had long tried to outrun. For Emma, success came with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. Her campaigns were suddenly the talk of the boardroom. Clients sought her insights, colleagues deferred to her judgment, and Jonathan Sterling himself had publicly praised her innovative strategy during a quarterly meeting. Every compliment, every acknowledgement felt like sunlight after a storm. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that her newfound triumph was shadowed by questions about Gabriel. Who exactly was he to wield such quiet power? How could a man who had appeared in her life as a hired stranger now sit at the top of corporate decision-making tables with the ease of someone who had never left them? One Thursday afternoon, as she prepared slides for a new proposal, she overheard two senior managers whispering outside the conference room door. Their voices were low but urgent, carrying the tremor of gossip laced with fear. "I'm telling you, it's him," one said. "Gabriel Stone, the same one who founded Archeon Holdings before it collapsed." "That's impossible," the other replied. "Stone disappeared years ago. They said he walked away after his partner stole the company." "Well, if you ask me," the first man murmured. "No one walks away from billions unless they're planning something bigger." Emma's pulse quickened. She waited until their footsteps faded, then sank into her chair, her thoughts racing. Archeon Holdings. She remembered that name from business school. It had been the stuff of legend. A meteoric rise, a scandalous fall, and a founder who had vanished without a trace. Could Gabriel really be that Gabriel? It seemed absurd, and yet the pieces fit too neatly. The knowledge, the confidence, the effortless command of any room he entered. That evening, unable to contain her unease, Emma waited outside Sterling Tower's private parking lot. When Gabriel finally emerged, dressed in his usual understated elegance, she called out to him. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded, gesturing toward his car. They drove in silence for several minutes until he turned into a quiet overlook on the city's northern edge. Below them, the skyline stretched in glittering lines of light, and the wind off the river carried the faint hum of traffic. "You've been quiet all day," he said softly, resting his hands on the steering wheel but not looking at her. "I heard something," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "About you. About Archeon Holdings." His jaw tightened, and the silence that followed felt like an answer in itself. "So it's true," she whispered. "You're the Gabriel Stone, the founder who disappeared." He exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the window. "I wondered how long it would take. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to be that man anymore," he said quietly. "The one whose name was printed on every financial journal, whose fall became entertainment for people who'd never met him." Emma turned toward him, her confusion mingled with anger and hurt. "You could have trusted me." It wasn't about trust, he said, finally meeting her eyes. It was about freedom. When I lost Archeon, I lost more than a company. I lost the right to be seen without suspicion. Everyone wanted something from me. An explanation, a favor, a chance to climb higher using my name. You were the first person who looked at me and saw just me. I couldn't risk losing that. She stared at him, her emotions a whirlpool of empathy and disbelief. So you just vanished? Walked away from everything you built? His expression darkened, the weight of memory pulling his features taut. I didn't walk away. I was forced out. My partner, Victor Hale, was my best friend. We built Archeon from scratch, 2 college kids with an idea and no backing. We turned it into an empire, but greed changes people. He manipulated the board, falsified records, and when I confronted him, he framed me for insider trading. The scandal broke before I could prove the truth. My lawyers advised me to settle quietly, to disappear until the noise died down, but by the time it did, Archeon belonged to him. The bitterness in his tone wasn't loud. It was restrained, cold, the kind that only years of restraint could forge. I spent a decade rebuilding myself in the shadows, helping small businesses, teaching startups how to avoid the mistakes I made. I stopped caring about my name, about power. Then I met you. Emma's anger softened, replaced by an ache that felt too complex for words. You've been carrying all of this alone, she murmured. He smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. It's easier to carry ghosts when no one's watching. They sat in silence, the city lights flickering below like distant stars. Finally, Emma reached across the console and placed her hand over his. You can't keep running from your own story, Gabriel. You didn't lose everything. You just stopped claiming what was already yours. Her words seemed to strike something deep within him. He looked at her hand resting on his, then at her face, illuminated by the faint dashboard glow. You really believe that? I do, she said firmly. And maybe it's time the world remembers who Gabriel Stone really is. He didn't answer right away, but the look in his eyes shifted from sorrow to something fiercer, something alive. The very next morning, a ripple ran through Sterling Communications. News broke across industry circles that Archeon Holdings' board of directors was under investigation for fraudulent accounting practices. Evidence provided anonymously, though those who paid attention could guess the source. At the same time, Jonathan Sterling called an emergency meeting announcing that Gabriel Stone would be assuming an official executive advisory role pending corporate restructuring. The press had a field day. Rumors exploded, investors speculated, and within hours, Sterling's stock surged. Emma watched all of it unfold from her office, both awed and terrified. Gabriel hadn't just returned to the stage. He had rewritten the script overnight, yet as the world rediscovered his name, the distance between them began to grow. The man who had once been her quiet ally now moved in boardrooms and strategy sessions. His demeanor colder, sharper. One night, after nearly a week of unanswered messages, she found him in his temporary penthouse office overlooking the city. Papers and files were spread across the desk, but he barely looked up when she entered. You're shutting me out, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I'm protecting you, he replied without meeting her eyes. This is going to get ugly, Emma. Victor won't stay silent. He's already moving against me, and anyone too close will be collateral. I don't care, she said, stepping closer. You don't get to decide that for me. He looked up then, and for the first time she saw the fear behind his control. Not fear for himself, but for her. You don't understand. When people like Victor fight, they don't use weapons, they use reputations. They'll dig, they'll twist, they'll destroy anyone connected to me. You've worked too hard to lose everything because of my past. Her heart ached at the rawness in his voice. I didn't fall for your name, Gabriel. I fell for the man who believed in me when no one else did. He went still, the air between them heavy with words unspoken. Slowly he stood, his hand lifting to brush her cheek in a gesture that was both hesitant and tender. Emma, he whispered, I've spent years trying not to need anyone. And now you're the one person I can't stop thinking about. Tears pricked her eyes, but before she could respond, his phone buzzed sharply on the desk. He glanced at the screen and his face hardened. He's making his move, he said grimly. Victor just leaked documents accusing Sterling Communications of insider collusion, with me as the centerpiece. The color drained from Emma's face. That means that they'll come for us both, Gabriel finished. Outside, the city thundered with rain as if the heavens themselves mirrored the storm that was about to break. Inside that quiet office, The man who had once vanished from the world and the woman who had dared to believe in him stood on the edge of a truth that would either destroy them or set them free. And somewhere deep inside, Gabriel knew that this time he wasn't going to run. The fall and the rise. The storm outside Sterling Tower raged like a reflection of everything unraveling within. Wind lashed against the glass walls. Lightning carved silver veins through the night, and the sound of thunder seemed to echo the chaos flooding through every corner of the corporate world. In less than 24 hours, the name Gabriel Stone had returned to headlines across the country. Articles exploded online. News anchors resurrected his past like vultures circling a wounded legacy, and speculation turned venomous. Words like scandal, deception, and fraud filled the airwaves, twisting facts into narratives that sold outrage. And yet through it all, Gabriel remained calm, sitting in his office surrounded by the glow of a dozen screens, watching the war of perception unfold with the same quiet precision that had once made him unstoppable. But even his composure couldn't mask the exhaustion behind his eyes. He had expected this. He had even planned for it. But what he hadn't anticipated was the fear etched across Emma's face when she entered the room that morning. She closed the door behind her, the hum of the rain filling the silence. "It's everywhere," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to hold its edge. "They're saying Sterling Communications is under investigation because of you. They're calling it the Stone scandal." Gabriel didn't look up. "Let them. It won't last." She stepped closer, anger lacing her words now. "That's not an answer. You're pretending like this isn't destroying everything we've built here." His gaze lifted to hers, calm but weighted. "I'm not pretending, Emma, I'm waiting. The truth always needs its moment to arrive, and when it does, it needs to be undeniable." She stared at him, torn between admiration and fear. "You sound like a man who's ready to burn everything just to prove a point." He rose slowly from his chair, the soft rustle of his suit cutting through the rain. "I'm a man who already lost everything once," he said quietly. "I won't lose it again, not to greed, not to lies, not to Victor Hale." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Gabriel turned his screen toward her. A document glowed on the display, pages of bank records, email trails, and transfer logs. "This," he said, tapping the screen, "is what Victor didn't count on. The trail he left behind when he thought he'd erased me. Every hidden transaction, every shell company he used to drain Archeon's accounts, it's all here. I've spent months collecting it." Emma's eyes widened. "You've been preparing for this?" He nodded. "Every step since the day I accepted Sterling's invitation was deliberate. I needed a platform to strike back from, and Sterling Communications gave me one. What I didn't expect," his voice softened, "was you." Her chest tightened at the honesty in his tone. "So what happens now?" He turned toward the window, the city a storm of lights and shadows below. "Now," he said, "we end this. Publicly, completely." By the next morning, the world had changed again. Sterling Communications held a press conference to address the allegations, and the ballroom that had once hosted glittering galas was now packed with reporters and cameras. Jonathan Sterling stood at the podium first, his tone measured as he denied the accusations of collusion. But the room shifted when he introduced the man everyone had come to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Mr. Gabriel Stone." The flashes of cameras painted the air in white bursts as Gabriel stepped forward. He looked composed, unflinching, his eyes steady on the crowd before him. The whispers quieted when he began to speak, his voice clear and deliberate. 10 years ago," he said, "I built a company called Archeon Holdings on the belief that success should serve people, not enslave them. I trusted a man who didn't share that belief. When I discovered his betrayal, he destroyed my name to protect his own. I disappeared not because I was guilty, but because I needed proof. Now I have it." He clicked the remote in his hand, and behind him a screen lit up with evidence, emails, timestamps, forged signatures. The room gasped as the narrative reversed in real time. He didn't just defend himself. He dismantled a decade-old lie piece by piece, revealing Victor Hale's manipulation of funds, his use of Gabriel's identity for offshore laundering, and the falsified documents that had driven the founder into exile. The presentation lasted nearly an hour, but when it ended, silence hung heavy in the air. The kind of silence that followed undeniable truth. When Gabriel finally stepped back from the podium, he looked directly at the reporters. "I came here tonight not to clear my name, but to remind everyone that integrity doesn't vanish with accusation. It hides, it waits, and then it rises again. The explosion of applause that followed wasn't the polite kind that fills corporate rooms. It was the raw sound of redemption. Cameras flashed, journalists surged forward, and for the first time in years, Gabriel's name was spoken not with scorn but with respect. Within 24 hours, Victor Hale was arrested on charges of corporate fraud and embezzlement, the evidence Gabriel had presented forming the backbone of the case. The empire that had stolen his identity crumbled overnight. Yet amid the triumph, Gabriel felt strangely hollow. The vengeance that had fueled him for years now felt small compared to what he had found and nearly lost. Emma's trust, her faith, the fragile warmth of something real. Late that night, as the rain finally faded and the city quieted, he found himself standing outside her apartment building. He didn't knock immediately. Through the window, he could see her sitting by the lamp, reading. She looked peaceful, tired but strong. The woman who had taught him that rebuilding didn't mean returning to who you were. It meant becoming who you were meant to be. When he finally knocked, she opened the door, surprise and something softer flickering in her eyes.
"Gabriel," she whispered.
"You shouldn't be here. You've been on every channel for hours." "I know," he said quietly, stepping inside. "But there's one thing the cameras can't say for me." He hesitated, the words catching in his throat. "I came back into the light for revenge. I stayed because of you." She stared at him, her heart beating faster, torn between disbelief and the emotion that had been building since the night of the gala. "Gabriel, everything you've done, it's changed everything. You've changed everything." He smiled faintly. "So have you. You reminded me that worth isn't measured by power or wealth. It's measured by how we rise after being broken." The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the city below. Then she stepped closer, her voice trembling. "So what now? What happens after the headlines fade?" He looked at her, his expression both tired and hopeful. "Now," he said softly, "I start over. Not as the man I was, but as the man I finally understand how to be. And if you'll let me, I want to build that life with you." For a moment, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Then Emma reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "You don't need permission to start over, Gabriel. You already have." In the weeks that followed, Sterling Communications stabilized under new leadership, with Gabriel serving as a silent advisor rather than a public figure. He declined interviews, turned down offers, and quietly began investing in small startups run by people like Emma, dreamers who needed someone to believe in them. The scandal that once threatened to destroy him instead became a lesson in integrity, and his story transformed from tragedy to triumph. One evening, months later, as the sun set over the city, Gabriel and Emma stood on the same overlook where he had once confessed his past. The sky burned with hues of amber and rose, and the world below seemed far less cruel than it once had. "Funny," she said softly. "The last time we stood here, you were trying to convince me not to believe in you." He smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders.
"And now?"
"Now," she said, leaning into him. "I'm glad I didn't listen." He laughed quietly, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "You know, for someone who hired me for one night, you turned it into a lifetime contract." She smiled. "Then I guess you'll have to keep proving you're worth the rate." The wind carried their laughter into the fading light, the city shimmering below like a promise. The stranger she had once hired was no longer a mystery, no longer a disguise. He was a man who had fallen, risen, and learned that redemption wasn't about reclaiming what was lost. It was about finding what was meant to be. And as the sun slipped beyond the skyline, casting long golden streaks across the world they had rebuilt together, it became clear that both Emma Rose and Gabriel Stone had not just survived their storms, they had transformed them into the light that guided their way forward. The end.